Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Revere End Podcast. Today, I'm joined again by my co-host, Billy Dunform. Billy, how you doing today, mate?
Yeah, not bad. I don't know if you saw that, but they probably wouldn't include it. But it's a good start to the pod.
I'm not going to include that.
Leave our sort of viewers just like wondering what just happened.
Thank God I edited the actual podcast. That is all I'm going to say. Today, I'm also joined, as you can probably see, by the familiar face on the channel, Ben Ambrose from Norwich Talk. How you doing, Ben?
I'm all right. I thought I'd ruined your intro then because I did a little laugh after you clap, but I'm delighted to be here, I shall say.
Professional as ever.
Well, we've got a lot to cover. It's been a busy couple of weeks, really, and it's not really finished, I guess, with a lot of the kind of subjects that we'll be talking about with deadline day looming. But I guess if we're going to start where it all kind of kicked off this weekend, early kickoff on Saturday against Derby. There's so much to talk about, to be honest with you. And I don't know if who kind of wants to start with this, but I guess it's like an overall analysis of the result, more so the performance for a start. How, I guess, impactful is a 1-0 loss at home to Derby?
Yeah, I mean the result wasn't great, and I think it certainly doesn't help things at this stage in terms of where Norwich are currently. Obviously, you talked about the looming, the transfer window that is going to shut in a few weeks. So Norwich really could have done without that 1-0 loss. But I mean, we'll get into more, I suppose, of an analysis of the game and sort of get everybody's viewpoints across. But I was immensely frustrated during the game. We watched it together, didn't we, Alfie? And it was a bit of a slog watching it, and it was just so boring and annoying, and just like almost like makes you a little bit sort of like irritated at what was going on. But following the game and following sort of analysing and stuff, which we'll get into, I was actually I struggled to find too much that I was annoyed about. There was elements that frustrated me, and I do have some criticisms of some areas, but I can't sit here and say I'm really disappointed at the way we played and stuff. Look, the result wasn't great, and I think actually the frustrations that we have, and I'm sure we'll get onto them, probably are more so impacted from recent events in the last 12 months. You know what I mean? Like what's been going on. And actually, if you take this game in isolation, I think it probably wasn't as bad as maybe some are making out. But I mean, Ben, feel free to sort of get your opinions across. I don't know if you'd be inclined to agree or whatnot.
Do you know what? I agree with what you said in terms of the actual performance wasn't that bad. That's a dangerous thing to say these days, especially if you tweet it as well. You tend to get shot down pretty quick. I did see your what word will I use? Meltdown on Twitter, Alfie, after the game. And I became very excited for this podcast. But for me, I don't know whether to take a sort of more broader point of view now, but my main concern is more sort of Norwich post-transfer window. Billy, you said the transfer window shuts in a couple of weeks. I'm pretty sure it's tomorrow, isn't it? October 5th.
Yeah, well, isn't that the...
is it the
yeah
domestic international?
So like
European deadline.
Yeah, I can't remember what way it is. I think the domestic one runs a few weeks later.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, my main concern is sort of post that, because I think, and this is probably a point we'll speak a little bit about, but I want to know what Norwich's ambitions are following that, because we knew we were going to lose players. We've lost Jamal Lewis. We're going to lose Ben Godfrey. And it's going to be a case of, are we going to lose Buendia, Aarons, Cantwell maybe as well? So for me, in terms of actually being angry at Norwich City rather than frustrated at a game, I'm saving that for later. I'm sure that'll come. But, Derby wasn't too bad, to be honest with you. But I don't know what else you guys want to say about it.
No, I think if you actually, when you say that point about actually we weren't that bad and sort of how brave you have to be to sort of put that out there and sort of like the Norwich City echo chamber, I completely agree. But like the problem is, like, how many times have we've been sat here and said, actually, you know what, the performance wasn't too bad, but Norwich City is still coming away without 3 points, and you can excuse it to some degree in the Premier League, but I think there was that expectancy that we wouldn't be sat here reeling off those sort of same sound bites, if you like, and saying the same things, and actually Norwich would have made sort of significant improvements. It's still early days. There's still like we say, time in the transfer window. There's still a lot that is going to happen for the time that this squad is set in terms of the dynamic and where everybody is. But yeah, I think maybe I agree, sort of save that for a later date. But it depends on what perspective you really want to take on it, I suppose.
I suppose if we look at because I do think, as much as I might be not the most negative here, but I guess most emotionally traumatized by that performance. If we look at the positives, because I generally think, here's my kind of take on it, is that if we win that game 1-0 and play the exact same, everyone's coming away like, that was a really good, hard-fought win. And I think that's the thing for me. And I do want to say off the bat, there was 2 individual performances which I was so happy with, right? And I guess, I'm interested to kind of get your guys' take on it as well. I want to say for a start, Ben Gibson looks like I know it's one game. He looks like one of the best individual performances or defenders for the system we play. And the fact that he's a left-sided centre-back, obviously playing Godfrey previously as a right-footed, left-sided centre-back. And also the fact that Ben Godfrey, as much as I love the guy and as great as he is, I generally think Ben Gibson has already played in that one game better than what Ben Godfrey has in the opening 3 games, for example, right? And I also wanted to praise Lucas Rupp. I've given him a lot of stick in his time here, but I genuinely think the man, apart from his decision to not take out Knight, I think it was, earlier than when he give away the free kick, I thought he was absolutely fantastic. Ben, I'll come to you first. Again, from kind of like the game itself, what were your general kind of takes on not only those 2 players, but anyone else as well? Was there anyone else that kind of you felt impacted the game or surprised you or you were happy with?
So I'd probably go for Marco Stiepermann and Buendia, and I'm not going to take any sort of praise for picking them 2 out because, it's 2 obvious choices. They're 2 guys who ripped up the championship last time. I'm gonna go against the grain a little bit. I was more excited to see Buendia than Stiepermann. Mainly just because I think he's more exciting to watch. But Marco Stiepermann, again, was sort of the glue in the middle, wasn't he? We look a lot better. We look more physical. I wish he'd have been a bit deeper in the box sometimes for these crosses that kept coming in to Teemu Pukki from Kintyre. I was a bit like, well, why is that happening? But definitely Buendia and Stiepermann for me. I thought Max Aarons was pretty good. When you said your 2 players, you picked 2 players out, I thought one of them was going to be Max Aarons because he looks so quick. He looks so mature, which I don't think he did as much in the Premier League because, he was the first time in the Premier League, of course, but he looked like a player who had been around for a while. Maybe he did last season, whatever. But Max Aarons was good for me. Teemu Pukki, Teemu Pukki. I'm a bit scared of Teemu Pukki at the moment. I'm a bit scared to talk about Teemu Pukki. I'd probably have to pick Buendia and Stiepermann and just leave you on a little nugget, which is Ben Gibson, Ben Godfrey, mate. You're going to have to explain yourself a little bit later on for that.
What about you, Billy?
I think I agree with the praise with Ben Gibson. I wouldn't say, I think it was almost like the novelty factor. Obviously, we haven't seen him play before. And we haven't really seen somebody of his sort of profile play in that position. So I was really impressed with Ben Gibson. And, I think statistically, like he showed up really well. To me, he almost seems to be like a blend of what Godfrey and Zimmerman offer. I'm not sure I'm getting as carried away as you are, to be honest. But I think he made like 4 clearances, won 100% of his aerial duels, but still has that 90% pass success rate. And obviously, Derby didn't really press us that high up, so probably a little bit of a blasé about that. But I think he was impressive. And actually, I'm finding myself having more reasons to sort of like defend Lucas Rupp. I think his foul for Knight was obviously unfortunate. And I think it's fairly easy to sort of sit here and say, he should have made a tactical foul earlier. But look, there's so many different factors sort of influencing that. And we can all sit here, can't we, and say, I would have done that. But yes, I think that's a little bit harsh. You're talking about England's top international goal scorer just bending it in the top corner. But yeah, Lucas Rupp also really, really, really pleased me. And I think I've backed Lucas Rupp a lot, actually. And I wouldn't necessarily say that he's not like my favourite Norwich City player, but I think there is, out of the 3 eights, if you like, in terms of Vrancic, McLean and Rupp, I certainly think he's the most promising. 92% sort of pass success rate. I think 2 key passes, 7 accurate long balls, which is really interesting. He won 5 of his ground duels, which is what you want from that type of midfielder. So I probably agree with sort of Ben Gibson and Lucas Rupp. But again, it's hard not to look at Ollie Skip, isn't it? Somebody who's really promising as well. Just every game, I don't know again if it's because we've never really had an Ollie Skip type player in this side, but yeah, I'm really excited about him long term as well.
I definitely would agree with your point, Ben, about Stiepermann. It's weird because it's almost like Stiepermann without Buendia is a completely different player. And I know that might sound quite obvious because obviously they gelled so well together, but I saw a lot of people get quite excited when the teams were announced when Stiepermann was in the team, being like, yes, come on, this is what we've asked for. And I think I think you might have been a bit of the same, Bill. I wasn't really like in the kind of necessarily that's exactly what we need, but when he played, the way that they were throwing the ball through the final third compared to what we watched at Bournemouth the week before, it was just a lot more entertaining and a lot more free flowing. And it looked like the players got more confidence going through Stiepermann than what they would any other player, because he hasn't really played there for really almost like since he went up. Because, you know, you got Andre Duda and other players that come in. I don't know if you want to add anything there, Bill.
I was just going to say, like, I think Steve, like, you're right. I'm not a Stiepermann fan for the reasons that I think a lot of people expect him to come in and be the same player that 2018-19. Like, the reason Stiepermann was so effective in the Championship was like the element of surprise. Like, nobody knew how to deal with him, and nobody really knew what to expect. And I think the Stiepermann actually was really had a really positive impact in the game. But I think if you actually look at his positioning, like, I know you talked about, Ben, about how you wish he'd sort of like got into the box a little bit more for the crosses. And I think I would agree. And I think, look, he has that stature and he has that aerial presence. But at the same time, I think he's actually more effective a little bit deeper now. Like 2018-19, he was really good linking up with Pukki. I don't necessarily think we're going to see a Stiepermann-Pukki-esque partnership this season. Certainly not to that extent. What I want Stiepermann to do is play a little bit deeper, and actually in possession we were more of like a 4-3-3 than a 4-2-3-1 at times, and like Rupp and Stiepermann actually did come quite close and play as eights, and I thought that was really pleasing actually, because it does prove that Stiepermann actually can play through those thirds and isn't just like almost like a shadow striker, if you FM terms, you know, playing like close to Pukki, like he actually can drop deep, and that's what pleased me about Stiepermann. I
guess to kind of ask a wider question, and I'll come to you first, Ben. What went wrong? Why are we sitting here now? And I guess we could kind of take the short answer of a bit of brilliance from Rooney, but why have we lost now to back-to-back games against Bournemouth and Derby and come away feeling like we've dominated the game but just come short? What's gone wrong?
That is a very tough question. That is a very, very tough question. But for me, probably, not probably, I think this probably is the answer, in that this is a team that just bottled the end of the Premier League massively. Norwich's worst ever season, whatever. They came into this season, decent little pre-season, sure, fine. Even though they played on pitches that looked like sandpits, but, you know, that was bizarre. But this is still a team who are so short on confidence. And where I sort of draw a little bit of a comparison between 17-18 and this season is that we've brought so many new players in. And the problem this time is the expectation. And I don't think Norwich have played terribly. You can argue they're playing terribly because they're not creating chances. But you look at the Derby game, you look at Bournemouth, you know, they were comfortable with the ball. They were trying to play their own style. There was no sort of regressive bottling it at all. For me personally anyway, Norwich were trying to play the Farke way, the Norwich way, whatever you want to label it as. Derby specifically, the opening 20, we looked really bright. I sat there and thought, right, where's this Norwich City been for the past couple of games? But again, this is a Norwich City team, one, bedding in new players. For as good as they might be as individuals, Ollie Skip is a brilliant example. He's a great player, but he's still bedding into the team. You know, he's been good. He'll get better. Kintier, again, another example. But the players who are playing, who have been here before, are still recovering from last season. And for me, if you go a little bit higher and look a little bit deeper, I don't really know if Daniel Farke has figured out his expectation/ambition for this season, which maybe potentially as a theory is translating onto the pitch. Because if we were going for promotion, we'd be sort of not trying to play as pretty football. We'd be going for sort of the rugged 1-0 win, wouldn't we? But from the performances against Bournemouth and Derby, again, that's not been the case, is it at all? I think it is very much just sort of wait until the window closes. We'll see who's here and figure out an ambition, which I think will be playoffs. Winning the playoffs won't be a priority for me, because you look at the AGM in 2019, they very cleverly said, we want to be a top 26 team. Norwich could finish 6th this season and not go up, and that would be a successful season. That would be them achieving their goals that they'd set out, which now I have to be careful here. I don't really have a problem with, because it's clear, it's transparent. I know what I'm expecting. I know what I'm paying for. But at the same time, I don't think it would go down brilliantly, because, as we know, Norwich lost the Championship 18-19, could have done a lot better in 19-20, and now in 20/21 we've got the expectation. But it's a question that needs to be asked right now, but it's one that'll get answered after the transfer window for me.
What about you, Bill?
No, I think, like, more holistically speaking, Ben, you make some really good points there. And I'll like to sort of get onto some of them in a moment. But in terms of what went wrong, I think what went wrong is Pukki slipped for the penalty. Like, I don't, it's not that simplistic, but unfortunately, I think in this case it is. Like, we were watching the analysis after the game, weren't we, Alfie? And they were sort of waxing lyrical about, they were waxing lyrical about sort of like the Derby's defending and studs on these certain studs. And it's like, at the end of the day, if Pukki doesn't slip over and that penalty goes in, like, the whole rhetoric and whole narrative around the game changes. So what went wrong is that Pukki slipped over, and then you're talking about confidence there, Ben. I don't know. I mean, we'll get onto Pukki in a moment, but it just says it all, doesn't it? Really, like, doesn't help the situation. And then it was Norwich missed a few chances. There was a bit of last ditch defending, and then England's top international goal scorer puts one in the top corner. I don't know. Like I say, I wasn't that angry at the performance. I thought we created chances. I thought we played through the thirds well. I thought the defensive structure was a lot better. There's not too much to be disappointed about. Derby were woeful, and you're looking at that game thinking, how have they come away with 3 points? Because I don't really see what they offered. The one thing that I was frustrated with was, you're talking about sort of taking into consideration the conditions. Well, like, why are Norwich playing so many long balls over the top of Derby's defence? Like, there's no space there. The ball's just skimming off the surface. Like, I wish we maybe just kept it on the floor. This decision to suddenly start crossing all of a sudden, which I like that Norwich are trying to add different patterns of play to their game, but why are you trying to lump the ball into the box to Emi Pukki when you've got Hugill and Ida, who are two genuinely physical strikers on the bench? It, like, fair enough, like, utilise crossing more, but, like, don't just, like, think Pukki's going to start winning loads of headers and, like, turn into a target man. So there are issues, but I struggle to be sort of too down about the performance, in all honesty.
That was going to be my next point about I guess there's been a lot of discussion, and I guess my kind of brief Twitter meltdown was not the beginning for me, but I saw a lot of fans on Twitter who typically had kind of backed Farke, had come out and said some kind of words, which I think a lot of it is acting out of emotion. But I guess, what are your thoughts? Again, I'll come to you first, Ben, about the kind of suggestion that we're trying to utilize as Pukki in this completely different role and almost turn him into like a target man when he's never really played as that. Do you feel like that's a fault of Farke? Do you feel like that's a fault of just I mean, we can't really blame Pukki for that, can we? Surely.
No, you can't blame Pukki for that. For me, the buck lies with Daniel Farke. I'm sure we'll get onto his role and whether he should be at the club or not a little bit later. I think it's just an easy-ish question to answer. Not as easy as last time for me. I'm sure that'll get referenced as well. A bit of egg on my face. But for me, yeah, Daniel Farke's, I'm not going to say at fault, but to blame, at fault, whatever, I don't care, for it. The sheer quantity of crosses that went into the box, it was a bit like, why are you doing that? And the game was screaming out for Jordan Hugill. Maybe Adam Ida, but for me, Jordan Hugill, because he's a proven championship bully, and that is what Norwich City are absolutely crying out for right now. And the ball's coming into the box, and Kintia's got a great cross in him, by the way. I sort of forgotten what it was like to have a left back who can cross, but Kintia was absolutely sublime with his balls into the box, and you just want Jordan Hugill to be in there. I think he came on against Bournemouth, won a couple of headers, came on against, did he come on against, I'm pretty sure he did, won a couple of headers, and it's like, why is Daniel Farke then waiting so long? And them frustrations towards Daniel Farke with his substitutions are not enough for me to start making bold claims, but when, you know, I do my best to be an optimist. I'm sure you guys can recognise that. Everyone who ever watches any of my videos will recognise I do my best to be an optimist. But when something like that happens, it's hard not to get frustrated. And I know what you mean in terms of the old Twitter ranting. I used to do it myself quite a lot, but I can't bring myself to do it anymore, because sometimes I'll just look back at my tweets and I'll either delete them or think, just why have you said that? But yeah, it's hard not to be emotional after that, especially with sort of the expectation and the frustration that Ben Godfrey's going, and we'll lose more assets. That will happen at some point. But there's no crisis at Norwich City, and I didn't need to say that, but I just wanted to get that out there nice and quick, that there's no crisis.
I guess one kind of final thing or point I wanted to raise, especially from the Derby game, before we kind of touch on, I guess, our three kind of prize assets and the rumours around them, is in terms of Teemu Pukki. Now, obviously, the penalty miss wasn't a great moment for him. And I guess the way, aside from the pressing goal, it hasn't been a great ride for him in the last, 16, 17 games? 1 goal in 17 or something like that?
19, I think now.
Oh, been rubbish since January.
Well, is there a way back for him? Should we center our attentions around the young upcoming, Adam Eder, or the new signing Hugo, or are we kind of trying to get something out of a player that just isn't there anymore? What's your opinions?
I've famously, flown the flag for Adam Eder. I'm not going to back away from that. I think if you look at the decision to take Teemu Pukki out of the limelight, or the fire line, whatever you want to call it, at the back end of last season, and played Dermich as opposed to Eder, I can now see why that makes sense, because Dermich is nothing. In all honesty, we don't care about Dermich. Eder is an asset to us and somebody we want to develop. So whilst I was frustrated at the time, I can now see the logic as to doing that. And for me, like, the decision to play Pukki sort of becomes like more perplexing as like the weeks go on. I don't think there's a way back to Pukki to that level, or anywhere near that level. Do I think he can be value to our side? Yeah, I do. But I really struggle to see how there's an argument to say he deserves to start next week. I think up until this point, I've been banging the Adam Eder drum, but I can see why Pukki's starting. I can see why you want to give him that opportunity to find that form and see if it's there. Look, this isn't the same player, and that's going to upset some Norwich fans. And this isn't the same Teemu Pukki. This isn't anywhere near the same Teemu Pukki. Does it mean he can bring value? Does it mean that he can be, does it mean he can come back and contribute to the side? Yeah. But how can you say Teemu Pukki deserves to start next week when you've got someone like Adam Eder, who is coming on and positively impacting games, can do the Pukki well in terms of dropping deep and running in behind, is a threat in the box. So we talk about that decision now to be a bit more prominent with our crossing game. Well, actually, Adam Eder, whilst he's not necessarily the biggest aerial presence in terms of how he's going to compete, he is a physical player, and he's going to do better in that regard than Pukki. I don't see how. I think Pukki just needs to be taken out for a little bit, and Eder deserves that chance.
I don't want to drop Pukki for the sake of dropping Pukki because he's been terrible, because I don't think he's been terrible, but he's not done. He's not done at all.
He's not done.
Well, I was just going to say he could score 28 goals this season and technically not be at the standard he reached 18-19. He's not going to meet that standard. That's fine, because in this circumstance, we've got young Adam Eder, prime Jordan Hugel. It sounded weird to say that out loud. But you've got
that's the title.
Prime Jordan Hugel in band. But last time we were in the Championship, we had who was it? Just Jordan Rhodes, pretty much, wasn't it? And it's just like, we need something different. We don't need to get rid of Teemu Pukki. We just need to try something else. And if you look at the first half as well, he created that wonderful chance for Hernandez. And if that goes in, he scores the penalty, you're looking at a whole different argument. Oh, Teemu Pukki's back. But in a team that's struggling with confidence, evidently, massively, I feel harsh picking out one name, but I don't really think it should be Pukki. But I do think we should definitely try something new as opposed to get rid of Teemu Pukki.
Okay, so with the Derby analysts kind of out of the way for the time being, let's kind of look at the wider problem, not problem necessarily, but the wider topic which everyone's been discussing for really the last kind of, well, I guess you kind of say 6 months, but more particularly the last kind of couple of weeks. Now, obviously, the last time we kind of made a podcast with Connor Billy, we talked about Emi Buendia and Todd Cantwell. Since then, out of nowhere, Ben Godfrey has had this kind of crazy turn of events where, you know, Fabrizio Romano is now coming out and saying it's a completed move, and that's kind of when you know it is the real deal.
Here we go.
Now, of course, in terms of from what we know, we turned down a £20 million bid with £6 million in add-ons, which in itself, a lot of Norwich fans were saying, and I remember speaking to you about this, Bill, you thought it was a fantastic offer. And to our credit, and to, well, I guess to kind of Stuart Webber's credit, as we kind of have always expected with him, he did drain every last penny he could out of this deal. And it's looking like it's going to be 25 to a degree up front, upwards of towards 30 million with add-ons included. Obviously, some of that is going to go to York, which, as much as you normally be a bit annoyed about, I think that's really nice, because especially with the time period that we're in, that could keep them running for a while. But that's, I guess, a side point. But I'll come to you first, Ben. What's like your overall thoughts on the move? Obviously, it's never nice to lose a Norwich player like Ben Godfrey, who's been so fantastic for us. But what's your kind of overall thoughts?
Well, I did actually make a video on this, so if you want to go and watch that. I'll just keep my chair there. I'm not too upset, to be honest with you. I'm less emotional than what I thought I was going to be, because Ben Godfrey is a player who is very good. There's no hiding from that. Not a central midfielder. Can we shut up about that now? I don't know what the hell that's about. Going on about... I watched a video and someone said, we don't know what his best position is yet. I'm like, yes, we do. Why? You know, there is a centre-back being bought for £26 million.
Yeah.
His best position. I was like, all right, okay, cool. Whatever floats your boat. But Ben Godfrey is a very good player. I don't think... Same with Jamal Lewis. I think he's the second most replaceable at the assets. You look at Ben Gibson coming in, looked very at home against Derby. I'll agree with. I don't think I'll go into as much of a passionate rant about Ben Gibson, but he did look very comfortable. It's nice to have a left-sided player. But Ben Godfrey is a player with Champions League traits, as Hodgie infamously said, and I seem to keep quoting, so I'll carry on. But again, he's a young player with a lot to learn, fairly clumsy sometimes, and I don't know if I have the patience to sort of put up with that this season, given, as we mentioned earlier, expectations. I don't really know if I can handle watching a player develop for as long and as much in a short span of time, because Daniel Farke is, no matter what anyone says, walking a tightrope right now. But it's massive in terms of the finances. And I think Daniel Farke said this sort of fills the COVID hole in Norwich City, and I'm fine with that. I can totally live with that. There was a few sort of tweets about, is the money going to be reinvested immediately? No, we've made our signings, leave it alone. We knew what was going to happen, or we could sort of get a figure of what was going to happen. We could figure out what's going to happen, sorry. But I'm more glad that it fixes the COVID problems as opposed to anything. He's not that hard to replace. I'm going to miss him. He's going to develop loads at Everton, absolutely. A question I sort of want to ask you guys, and I will at one point, is I think he probably filled out his potential at Norwich City. I didn't see him getting any better under the coaching of Daniel Farke. Same with all the assets. And to go and be coached by Ancelotti, playing with players like James Rodriguez, it's such a massive opportunity for him. It's a credit to Norwich City. And as you said, York get, was it 2.5 million?
Something around that,
which
yeah.
will keep them floating for a while. I don't know if they're in trouble or not, but they're a team lower down in sort of the footballing pyramid compared to Norwich anyway. But it's just a great move for everyone involved, and Norwich weren't going to be bullied on the first price. I think Stuart Webber has made a deal, or he's made a thing about never accept the first price, even if it's the matched valuation of a player, never accept it, because it then shows a little bit of weakness, doesn't it? And he squeezed another 5 up front, plus whatever is being added on. And it'll be a club record fee, as Daniel Farke said. And he, as far as I'm sure he's concerned, he's done his job again in terms of developing players to make Norwich City money. It's a great move all round for everyone. And I look forward to watching Ben Gibson play.
What about you, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, the valuation of Ben is interesting, because when you're talking about how much is Ben Godfrey worth, you have to take into consideration the type of player that he is. He's a young English centre-back who's extremely quick and is comfortable on the ball. So already that's an extremely sort of lucrative sort of skill set or profile of a player for somebody to sign. I think in terms of the potential Ben Godfrey has at Norwich, I agree. I do think it's different to that at Everton. I don't feel like the defence that Ben Godfrey is surrounded at in Norwich really helps him, playing with sort of younger wing backs and Christoph and in Zimmerman, who, whilst okay, yeah, what is he now? 26. He's actually quite inexperienced if you're talking about playing at the top level or a good level because of sort of where he's come from. So I look at Ben Godfrey and I look at the defence that he's going into. You know, he'll be sandwiched probably between Luca Dean, Seamus Coleman, Michael Keane, Yerry Mina, obviously experienced centre back from Barcelona. So I think he'll really flourish there. And I'm a Ben Godfrey fan. And I'm certainly a Ben Godfrey fan at centre back because I agree. I don't know where this discussion has come from about defensive midfield. It's just madness to me. And I expect Ben Godfrey to sort of kick on from here. I think it's a deal that makes a lot of sense in terms of where Norwich are. Having Ben Gibson to come in, I'm probably going to make the point or make the argument that I actually think Norwich's defence has improved. Long term, that I think Ben
Godfrey... Could get worse though, could it?
No, but I think I do think our defence has improved with the sale of Ben Godfrey. I think obviously long term, Ben Godfrey has the ability to grow into somebody who far exceeds Ben Gibson's level. But I think it's a sensible move, and I think it's a good piece of business by Webber. I said that I didn't feel like that. Maybe it's just because I'm not Stuart Webber, but that first bid probably seemed about right to me. So the fact we've actually got a little bit more is credit to Webber. But I think if you've watched Ben Godfrey, with all due respect, in the last few months or pretty much this year, actually, since his head got turned in January, he hasn't been that same player as he hasn't been that. So it's been a tricky situation in defence for Norwich because of what's been going on in terms of the injuries and in the ins and outs. But I've said before, I feel like it's the end of a cycle for some players, and I think Ben's probably in that. But I would have loved to keep him. I'm not going to lie, but I do think actually if you take a step back and look at the impact it has on the club as a whole, and actually short term as well on the pitch, I think it does benefit Norwich.
I think one thing I just kind of wanted to add is, which is nice with Ben Godfrey's transfer, as opposed to the kind of potential looming outgoings of the next two players that we'll speak about, is it feels very much like it was as kind of respectful as it could have ended, for both parties, in a way that, Ben, to his credit, even if we kind of admit that, it was, his head might have been turned in January, he still, I'd like to think, give his all every game, and was, I guess, from what we've heard as well, training wise, he didn't really impact. Obviously, we don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but I feel like Ben Godfrey left on our terms as opposed to him kind of forcing that move out, which again, that's just from an outside looking in, but it feels a little bit more closer to like the kind of James Maddison sale as opposed to like an Alex Pritchard sale, as I kind of, I guess, relate the next two kind of players. And I almost feel like a sense of pride to a degree that we're able to, look at a young lad that come back off, was it Paul Hurst, Shrewsbury side in League One, and kind of go, who the hell is this? And then before you know it, he's, having such an incredible impact. Can
I just say something quickly? Because you talk about that, and I put this out on Twitter, and it's just a point that I want to make, that I think actually the person who probably comes out this looking the best is probably Farke, because we all laughed at him when he said that Ben Godfrey would become a world-class centre-back. And it's not, to be honest, I'm not a coach, so that's probably why, but I didn't look at Ben Godfrey and go, okay, let's make him into a centre-back. And the fact that he's done that, look, there's weaknesses in this game, and he's not a world-class centre-back, but the fact that we've pocketed a club record fee for him, for a player who, 24 months ago didn't even play in that position, is a credit to Farke. It's a credit to Godfrey for applying himself. And I agree, he's not that type of player to kick up a fuss and throw his toys out the pram. I wonder if that is impacted by his position and just like the general aura that surrounds Godfrey. It doesn't probably look great if you want to be a captain and you want to be a centre back rock and you're throwing your prams out the toy, or toys out the pram, prams out the toy. Wow, but you know what I mean. It doesn't fit the narrative around Godfrey, does it? Whereas, look, maybe it's a little bit of lazy journalism there, but you can see maybe certain other players doing that.
Can I just add something quickly? Upset camp a little bit in terms of the idea that he's had his head turned in January. Even if he did, I still think he was probably the most sort of visual evidence of a player still trying for Norwich. As clumsy as he was, because he did give the ball away sometimes, quite a few times with stray passes, which is why he shouldn't be in central midfield, by the way. But he was one of the few players who put in hearty performances week in, week out. I remember Spurs in the Cup, especially that block on the line. Yeah. He's done a few of them. He did one against Bournemouth as well, I think I'm right in saying. And it's just like, I just wanted to say, I just completely disagree with that in terms of performance levels maybe dropping because his head was tanned. But I don't know what you guys think about
that. I get what you mean. And I don't think that, like, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, I don't think Ben Godfrey got that offer and was like, all of a sudden he didn't want to play for Norwich City and wasn't going to turn up. Like, there's no doubt Ben Godfrey still applied himself, but I'm just saying I don't think his performances were at that same level following that. I think, look, credit to him, he still came out, he still gave him 100%, but I think it did impact his performances, whether this was sort of subconsciously or not. I'm not too sure, but look, it's a credit to him. Like I say, he hasn't kicked up a fuss, and it has ended on good terms for Norwich and Ben Godfrey, which is pleasing, and it's how it always should be because we gave him his opportunity. He flourished to an extent. Ultimately, let's not beat around the bush. He was a key part of a defence that got relegated in record terms. So, but you know, it's a good deal, and I think it's probably the right time as well.
Unless anyone has anything else they kind of want to mention on Ben Godfrey, I guess it's probably right to move on to the two players which we don't really have any idea as of this moment if they're going to be a Norwich player tomorrow, in 2 weeks' time, or whatnot. It's really tough for me when I hear this, because I think for any Norwich fan, you never want to hear the players that the kids have up on their walls and on the back of their shirts. As soon as they get a bid in or they come down, they kind of feel like there's that necessity to be where they think they deserve to be. And I think it's a tough one, right? Because obviously there's been a very interesting picture painted of these two players by the club in the way that Farke come out in this press conference, which I won't go over too much, at least for me and Billy, because we've kind of heard our take on our podcast today. But where does this leave us with Emi Buendia and Todd Cantwell? Again, I'll come to you first again, Ben, and kind of ask, obviously, we haven't heard your say necessarily on this channel from the press conference and what's been said already. But first of all, what's your kind of opinions on, the reported down tools, as much as I hate using that term, of their kind of performances and attitudes? And following that, what do you think is the best outcome for Norwich City with these two players?
First and foremost, I sort of tried to avoid this because there are many opinions. There are many aggressive and hostile opinions, and the more positive opinions, I think, would get berated. Again, I tried to be an optimist, so I'll look to play devil's advocate a little bit. The first thing I do want to say in regards to this situation, and these are two great examples, but I do just want to question, is this Daniel Farke being a bit too sort of proud, if you know what I mean? You guys don't swear on this podcast, do you? Or is swearing acceptable?
Not yet.
Okay, right. Well, I'll leave it out then. But we've seen with Daniel Farke before that if anyone ever questions him, he becomes a bit of an idiot. We saw with Connor, he wrote an article and he overreacted massively. So is Daniel Farke, and we've seen it with Nelson Oliveira. Not saying he overreacted. We saw it with Buendia. When did we see it? Watford time.
End of last season, yeah.
Yeah, end of last season, whatever. A few times last season. Yeah. The question needs to be asked, is Daniel Farke overreacting? The answer should be no, but with the whole article thing, there is sort of that alarm bell in my head that says maybe he is, maybe he's not. In terms of the two individuals, Emi Buendia's attitude has been pretty poor since he's been at Norwich, I thought. It's just the fact that he is this player who is just utterly immense and seems worth it at times. But the arms have always been swinging. He's always stormed down the tunnel. There's been times last season he dropped 2 or 3 times. I remember fighting for Lucas Rupp starting over Emi Buendia because his attitude was that poor. I remember Kieran Scott saying to us on our channel when Connor interviewed him back in, must have been late May of 2019. He basically said it was a risk when they signed Buendia because they knew what he was like. They knew he had that sort of South American fire in his belly, we'll say. So there's no surprise there for me. He obviously did an interview where it was essentially a come and get me plea. I don't care what anyone wants to say about that. I made a video, a fairly positive one at that, about Emi Buendia after that, saying, he wants to be here. I think that was naive of me. As far as that goes, that was a come and get me plea. I don't care what he says about how happy he is here. He's basically said, someone come and get me. He's basically said, hello, I'm still here if anyone wants to buy me. And I can imagine the club weren't pleased with that. because that's not something you encourage a player to do, is it? So for me, with Buendia, it's no surprise. Maybe I sit with Daniel Farke on this in terms of it's at the point now where I'm a bit fed up with the whole Buendia's attitude, this, Buendia's attitude, that. If it stinks, it stinks. And if he doesn't want to be here, see you later. And as I was saying, I was going to move on to Todd Cantwell before I think Billy just got a bit sick of me. I don't really blame him, to be honest with you. I do waffle a bit. But I was just going to say with Todd Cantwell, it's a different circumstance. His journey to the club was very, very different to Buendia's, obviously. Local lad, lovely story, love it, boom. But I don't know where I sit with Cantwell, to be honest with you. Now, we're the same age as him, effectively. So in terms of the online abuse, he's getting to put a tweet out yesterday saying that it stinks of a toxic fan base when you've got fans tweeting ha 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 at him not getting into England under 21s, which I think is pathetic and childish and petty, unnecessary for a player that you were idolising but a few months ago, if you know what I mean. And that's ridiculous for me. In terms of his actual attitude, I don't blame him for wanting to leave, because from my perspective, I know he won't think this, but this is the best chance he'll have at getting a big move. But at the same time, someone's got to come and buy him. And I very much imagine the situation has been nobody has come in to buy him. And maybe it's up for him to realise that no one wants him, perhaps, especially for the price that Stuart Webber has levelled him as, which I imagine is 15, 20 million. That's my personal one, but as Billy said earlier, none of us are Stuart Webber. We don't know what goes on in that man's head. But in terms of discipline, he needs to react to what Daniel Farke said. It's much easier said than done, but Daniel Farke says that I've said this for a reaction, and if they don't want to react, right, okay, maybe that's a bit sort of savage from Daniel Farke, but it's Todd Cantwell's duty to respond, to fight, to be back in the team. And whether that's because he wants Norwich to succeed or he wants someone to come in and buy him, I don't mind, because if he comes in and fights and plays well, there's only one sort of person, there's one party, who benefits from it, and that's Norwich at the very least. But in this, I'm more focused on sort of the crap that he gets online, which I think is stupid, because Todd Cantwell's a guy who he quite clearly enjoys himself. Maybe perhaps he's a bit sort of soggy at times, a bit weird. But that's because it's different. That's soggy. That's the word I use. But it's because he's different, and people sort of react weirdly to different, don't they? It's natural. It's not a good thing, but it is natural. But I feel bad for the sort of crap he gets online, because it's ridiculous. But he needs to react. In terms of actually answering your question, he needs to react to what Daniel Farke said.
What about you?
That was so long. I'm really sorry about that.
That's fine.
I mean, I don't really want to go over my opinions on Todd and Emi. The thing I will say though, now, like a week on from when we last spoke about it, is I just can't keep up, and I just can't put my finger on what's going on. Like, none of it really makes too much sense to me. I don't think Farke has covered himself in glory in the way he's acted in the media. I think we could probably talk about that a bit more generally, actually, because I think Farke is struggling. I think Farke is struggling to display his narrative, that what he wants from this Norwich side. He went pretty hard last season on actually it would be a miracle, all this, playing it down, and it backfired massively. And I think he's now realised he's now trying to claw up to try and be in the underdog again, and actually saying, and it's not really working. It's not really buying with Norwich fans. I'm not having this. I don't expect Norwich to walk the league, but I do expect Norwich to be somewhere near that top six, rightly or wrongly. I don't see how you can say not. So for him to try and underplay certain situations is a little bit perplexing. But yeah, I mean, Todd and Emi, I don't know. If we keep Emi and sell Todd, I'll be happy. Don't really rate Todd, to keep my answer nice and brief, in all honesty, which might be a little bit controversial, but tell me the last time he got a goal and assist or turn up to a crucial game. So that's what I'd say to that.
I think that the tricky thing is right now, which I think is probably fair to say, and again, because I don't want to dwell on it too much, is my only kind of final comment is it's a shame that there's such a, and I guess for sometimes the right or the wrong reasons, there's such a lack of transparency on this subject. Like we don't really know what's going on. All we're hearing is quite a vocal Daniel Farke on one side of it with his press conference comments, and really unfairly for Todd and Emi, not really anything from their camp. And I guess ultimately, like we say, we've kind of heard from Farke's side, but we've obviously seen Emi come back into the team, which suggests that I guess terms kind of you can speculate a good level between those two. But obviously it's the second week now we've seen Todd Cantwell not in the squad. I guess the problem I have is that I'd rather, if possible, if it was something which the club wanted to kind of inform the fans about what kind of situation we're in, we're all kind of expecting him to move on because of this, because it's getting quite toxic, as you like. But I feel like, again, I mentioned this before, there's no winners from this situation. All this does is make not only Daniel Farke or Norwich look bad. It's not a great advert to young players in the same breath that selling Ben Godfrey and having Max Aarons linked to Barcelona is. It's almost like an oxymoron of what we're actually trying to accomplish. So I think that's the only bad thing for me.
You do wonder if those comments that Farke made about Campbell, because obviously it looked nailed on that he was going to Leeds, and then all of a sudden it just, I don't know if that link is still there or not. You just wonder if it turned them off a little bit and actually made them reconsider their thoughts. I don't know. I think if you believe what is being said inside the club, that Todd's agent is not helping things, basically.
Very polite.
I think that is probably a valid sort of point. And we can go back to last season, really, can't we? When we won the title and got promoted, these issues still seem to be there around Todd. Off the pitch more than anything. But like I said, I don't know what his application is in training. The whole narrative really is just confusing me. Like one week there's photos of Emi Buendia and Todd Cantwell all over training. They're smiling, they're happy, it all is great. And then all of a sudden, no, they haven't trained well. They're not in the squad, but Emi's in the squad. But Josh Martin and Sorensen have trained well, but they're not. I just don't know. Honestly, I can't really put my finger on it. And I think the whole transparency thing is an interesting point, because it's been a buzzword for Norwich City in recent years, but maybe it's, if we're being brutal, it's just when it suits them, really.
Wow, that's quite a point. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, Norwich need to sort the comms out, because as you said, sorry Ben, but I completely agree. Like, I think they haven't done well. Like, this is a real broader issue, but like, I know there's been a few changes and I don't want to criticize, and there's no one individual's fault, but like the whole thing just hasn't been great in the last few months. Like, this is a completely irrelevant point, but even like the whole away kit thing with like just the whole narrative, I just don't think they've dealt with it well. And I think we can maybe a bit more closer to the point. You can sort of point that to how they've been acting in the media in the few weeks as well. But yeah, it needs to be sorted out, because it hasn't been great, and it's not what we've come to expect from sort of like this era and this sort of like group of people at Norwich. Mm-hmm. They just need to sort it out and organise it more, don't they? As you said, it's just unclear. And you mentioned earlier, you've got pictures of Buendia smiling with his thumbs up, and then Daniel Farke is telling us he's not up for it in training. I know. Do you know what? I know that Jesus Christ, I'm desperate for this not to turn into sort of a slating of the media team at Norwich City. But
like I say, it's not one person, it's not one individual's fault. For me, it just feels like previous campaigns, it's felt like everybody's on the same wavelength, and this is what we're going to run, and this is how we're going to portray the club. I don't know what Norwich are. Are we an underdog? Are we a title favourite? Are we struggling financially? Are we now really good at development? I just don't know what's going on. And feel free to carry on. But yeah, I'm not picking on one person in particular. I just think it's a bit more of a broader issue.
Yeah, I'm sure that'll be a question at some point, won't it, Alfie?
Well, I guess what I had down as kind of like the next topic to discuss is just what lies ahead for Norwich, whether that's Farke, whether that's to a degree Stuart Webber going forward, not just like this here and now and the next game after the national break, but what is next for Norwich? Because it feels like the whole time it's been like, look, I'm here for 5 years pretty much. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to try to set out and achieve. And I don't know if it's because there's a lack of, just naturally because of the times we live in, the ability to kind of communicate that message across to fans like we would have the AGMs. I know we had it virtually, as disinterested as Webber looked on that one, which was quite funny a couple of months ago. But I guess as a wider point, I don't know if it's a fault of just the times we're living in to why that the message isn't being communicated, or they're taking advantage of the times that we're in to see, like, you know what, if we make this decision and the fans don't like it, they're not in the stadium to make that message clear to us. And as much as that seems like a potentially silly point, like I think that does have something to say. Like, I remember the Jez Moxie era. Like, if we didn't vocally say anything, we're not a nasty bunch here at Norwich, I'd like to think, but when we don't like something, we're very vocal about it. And I think, to the credit of the fans, when things get quite tough, it does appear on match days. And the fact that they don't have that match day capacity now to really go at them, do you feel like they're almost not trying to take the mick a bit, but trying to push their luck to a degree of trying to keep these the communications out of the club as little as possible? Would you agree with that? Would you disagree with that?
I think Norwich definitely understand the situation in that they won't have fans at the ground to make their thoughts clear. Stuart Webber makes it a big deal of him, Daniel Farke, well, not Daniel Farke, because apparently he reads Pinkin articles, but they don't look at social media. And I'll link it to the previous point, which is about Norwich sorting their comms out. There's such an impact and influence on fandom, whatever. Fandom, I don't know why I said the word fandom there, but social media has a massive influence. And in terms of the general direction, Norwich know that there aren't going to be fans there, as I said. And I think it is just a case of they're trying to figure it out for themselves, to be honest with you. We know, I think it will be playoffs in terms of where they want to finish in the league. The style of it, I still think they're trying to figure out, because Daniel Farke doesn't know who he's going to have. Now, one thing about Daniel Farke where I do feel sorry for him is that his job is almost impossible, in that when he builds this player to be good enough for the Premier League, he then gets stripped away from him and he's got to do it all over again. And realistically...
He is aware of that, though. Like, I agree. But Daniel Farke knows the situation at Norwich City. They know how we fund this club. So whilst I can understand his frustration, I'll be like, well, have you not sort of read your sort of job description in your brief? Because the idea is that you are here to develop young players and sell them on. So I understand that his maybe hand is weakened when Ben Godfrey and Jamal Lewis are sold. But at the end of the day, that 40 million or so isn't going to come from nowhere.
Yeah, you're right. But at the same time, that doesn't make his job easier. He might know what he's doing, but at the same time, it doesn't make his life easier, and he's got to do it all over again, regardless of the situation, whether it's his first season where he's getting used to the job. Now it's his fourth season. He knows the club, he knows the city, knows the country, knows the style of football. It doesn't get any easier. If anything, it gets harder because of that expectation. I very much think it'll be a case of post transfer window, Webber will come out and say, this is our plan, this is what will happen. Not what will happen, this is what we hope will happen. My natural assumption is it will be playoffs, and they're going to go for the rhetoric of we're going to build players for the future. Playing style, I don't know what Norwich City are going to do, because it could very much be Bournemouth, Derby, nice passing, a bit of, a lack of finishing, if you will, a lack of that final spark that we had in 18-19 that took us up. And I think I'm okay with that, but I think it would go down terribly. But you need to revisit the question post transfer window in terms of figuring out what the hell's going on at Norwich.
I agree that you can't really criticise Farke until too heavily until like the transfer window's done, because then he knows his sort of like hand and he knows his squad that he has at his disposal. But in terms of like the rhetoric which sort of surrounds Norwich and whether they will go down that route of trying to develop young players and producing the next batch, I can excuse like a mid-table finish if like Josh Martin and Adam Eder have played like 30 games. And I don't know if that's just my personal like beliefs and like what I enjoy from football. And I'm not sure if you're the same, that like actually like watching like young players develop is probably the most like fulfilling thing as a fan. But we're not seeing that. We're not seeing like Sam McAdam's out on loan, sat on Coventry's bench, which is probably going to become a bit more of a questionable decision if that remains. Barley Mumba's nowhere to be seen, despite a really good performance against Luton. Josh Martin was appearing towards the end of the Premier League season to be gaining a bit more traction in terms of minutes. He's been on the bench once. Adam Eder has yet to make a start. Like I get that. I'm hoping that changes, and that as we progress, like I know Farke's not one to chuck them in immediately, but the signs aren't suggesting at the moment that that's the route they're going down. Hopefully that does change.
Can I just say my sort of counter to that is when you look at what season we'll go off 18-19, Ben Godfrey didn't get into the team.
And that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, like if this is something that happens as the season goes on, then that's fine. But what I'm saying is like at that point, at the current time speaking, if time will tell if it turns out differently, but it doesn't appear that that's the case. But well, I get that, yeah.
Well, no, the difference is expectation, and expectation is such a terrible thing. And I'm sure Daniel Farke will be relieved that fans aren't there to give him the abuse for whatever is going on at Norwich right now. But Aarons didn't come in for 3 or 4 games, did he? Jamal Lewis was injured at the beginning of 18-19. Who else is there? Todd Cantwell barely played. these players were drip fed in,
Yeah.
and that could be what Adam Eder coming off the benches, Ballymumba playing one game. I don't know what.
Hopefully, yeah.
I don't know if he's going to be part of the plans or not. As you said, Sam McCallum, I don't think it's a weird one, because from what I've seen of him, I don't think he was anywhere near ready for Norwich City. And when you've got a player like Kintia, who is sort of a premium attacker, not defender, he can't defend. No fullbacks can't defend these days. But there's plenty of reasons to be hopeful. But as you said, it's the weight of expectation is Daniel Farke's. It's not Daniel Farke's friend, is it?
All right, so we've spoke quite a lot about Farke already, but I guess I kind of wanted to, before we look ahead to the upcoming matches after the international break, I just wanted to get a kind of final say from both of you about your overall opinions on maybe what you think is going to lie ahead for Daniel Farke in the coming weeks, or even a judgment game before you can really say, look, I think, to be honest with you, it's time we either potentially make a change, or vice versa. Do you feel like those opinions are completely wrong? Do you feel like he has done his job, as we've explained earlier, about how he's developed young players, and he is the right man to keep in to continue that process? What's your kind of your views? I'll start with you, Bill. What's your kind of views on that?
I think if going back to last season and Norwich were on that stretch of games where that sort of winless stretch of games, any other manager at pretty much any other club would have been relieved of their duties. The fact that Farke wasn't is an indication of the larger picture, and actually this whole idea of the model and Stuart Webber and Daniel Farke almost working in tandem. And it's pretty obvious what Webber tried to do sort of post Premier League in terms of absorbing that pressure and absorbing that blame. In terms of Daniel Farke, maybe like my expectations of him and what I want this season, I'm still not sure, and I wouldn't be sort of confident in making a prediction as to where we'll finish, because I can't work out if we're a million miles off it or a few moments away from winning a few of the games already. So I think I'd probably be a little bit more confident, like I say, sort of after 10 games, sort of November time, early December, making predictions sort of where I think we'll be. But I guess it just raises up, sort of reiterate my previous point about the development of youth, and like if we see Farke giving opportunities to youngsters as the season progresses, maybe or earlier on, then I'd be a little bit more apprehensive, maybe to berate him and to apply that pressure if we're still seeing sort of like Timu Pukki up front, who hasn't scored in like 30 games or whatever, like, hypothetically. Then I think maybe I'll be feeling a little bit different. But I don't know. I have mixed opinions about Farke. Do I want him sacked? No, I don't, because it doesn't really fit with what Norwich are trying to do at the moment. But it will be interesting to see where this all goes, maybe, and how this all pans out, because I can't really sort of put a finger on it at the moment.
What are you, Ben?
Good question. That's a fairly decent answer from you, Billy. I'm not going to lie to you. I agree with a lot of what you said. In terms of Daniel Farke, I don't know when you want to reference how pro Farke I was last time I was on the pod. I stand by that. I still think at the time I was absolutely right. I'm never going to say I'm wrong. But at the same time, I do stand by it. And I agree with what you said, Bill, in terms of the idea of not many managers would have survived that. I'd argue no managers would, and rightly so. But staying in the league wasn't Norwich's ambition. And I still think that's fair enough, because there was a lot of damage to be undone. It's still being undone in terms of Stuart Webber's point of view. But to actually answer the question in terms of Daniel Farke, there's one thing we can take for granted. He's still going to produce brilliant young players. That's not going to stop. He's been doing that since he got through the door. I'm looking forward to seeing who the next project is. I don't think that person or that individual has been identified yet. He's still got to develop Aaron's, Cantwell, Buendia, because they're all still here at the moment. But he needs to be smarter tactically. I do question whether he can read a game of football very well. Hopefully he doesn't watch this podcast. But he doesn't seem to be very, very smart in terms of... Well, do you know what? I think I'm probably right in terms of the fact that he doesn't cover himself in glory. When you look at the way he's set up against Derby, yeah, the passing play was okay. It was quick. It was nippy. But the main sort of source of threat seemed to be the crosses into the box, and I was a bit like, you've been in the job 4 years now, mate. You've had Timu Pukki for what is now his third season. I don't think he's suddenly going to start winning loads of headers. It's annoying that he scored a header against Preston. I think it was anyway, because I was going to say he's only scored one header in 3 years, but he scored that one against Preston, which shouldn't have gone in, by the way. But he needs to get smarter tactically. Because that is essentially how you win games of football. I don't know how much patience I've got for it in terms of him waiting. I think that'll very much... I'll give the answer to that question after I know what the ambition is for the season, because once I then realise what's happening, Daniel Farke can then sort of... I don't know if Daniel Farke knows, to be honest with you, because it seems to very much be the case that he doesn't know when a young player is about to go. I remember him kicking up a fuss about Alex Pritchard, and yesterday he's like, "Oh well, we planned for Ben Godfrey to play," and all of a sudden he's left the club just like that. So I don't know if Daniel Farke knows, but I'll preserve my judgment for post transfer window. But he needs to get smarter tactically. He's always needed to get smarter. For as much as I tried to defend his substitutions, they haven't been great lately. What did he take off? Buendia and Stiepermann, who were the only players who actually looked like doing anything. He took off Stiepermann when he was actually coming into the game, which I was like, maybe I'm just an idiot football fan. I am an idiot football fan. But I don't understand what he does tactically. His media handling has been hot and cold. It's been weird. I think it's probably the right word to use. Sometimes he speaks really well. Other times he's just a complete dick. And it's like, Daniel, stop being an idiot. Suck up the pride. Get on with it. I don't think he likes the fact that there's this expectation now. As you said earlier, Bill, he's trying to set the narrative of we're underdogs again. We're not. You can't hide from that. I'm okay with a season where we focus on rebuilding, don't focus on promotion, but don't hide away from the fact you've just come down from the Premier League and last time you were in this division, you lost it. Don't hide away from that. Put your hands up and say, right, we've got to go again. But yeah, and the whole Stuart Webber absorbing pressure off Daniel Farke just shows that Stuart Webber knows that Daniel Farke was going to get crap. Rightly so at times. There were times where he was naive. As I said, he was a dick to Connor, so my instinct is to automatically not like him.
The fourth time you said that, but
yeah, well, not enough people have called him out for it. To be honest with you, Bill.
Can I take over the role of host for a moment? And I won't. I want a buzz answer from both of you here, because if not, we'll be here for another hour. But if COVID didn't happen, and if fans were in the ground and Norwich's sort of resumption, the end of the Premier League happened in the same way, do you still think Daniel Farke would be here?
I'll take that one first. I can absolutely say that he wouldn't be here right now. That is, again, my personal opinion, and I'd be interested to hear Ben's.
What? So if the same, so Norwich had lost 10 games in a row, lost to Derby with the crowd there.
Not taking in terms of the Championship, like in the Premier League, like if fans were in that, watching that Premier League end of the season week in, week out. This is why I'm not host, by the way.
And the performances were the same? Everything
was the same, but just 27,000 Norwich fans were in that stadium.
Probably not, to be honest with you, because my whole argument for... I don't know how much you want me to answer this question, sorry, but if...
I said a buzz answer, Ben.
Well, you know what? I'm going to carry on, which is just that fans have been there. I don't think the last 10 games would have happened like that. I remember singling out games and the favourable run that was to be. That never happened. But yeah, I'd probably say no.
I feel like it's a really tricky one. And again, we'll probably be talking about this for however many podcasts we do in the future. You know, I feel like there's no right or wrong answer right now, you know, because on one caveat you can say, well, the fans aren't in the ground, so the performances are down. And at the same time, you can say, well, if the fans were in the ground, he'd be sacked. So it's just a poison chalice, isn't it? At the end of the day,
that's what Norwich City is, mate.
Well, I think that's the thing. Like at the end of the day, all you can kind of look at from face value is that it seems across the whole kind of 4 years, aside from the one kind of crazy campaign which we had, which I can't just drift over and say the crazy campaign because it was probably the best season I've ever watched of any Norwich side in my lifetime. It has been a lot of downs compared to ups. You know, I think back to the first year he was in, and even, you know, obviously now coming into kind of this year as well, and the Premier League for the majority, it's not been very pretty.
Just say that you want Farke sacked, Alfie. Just go for it, man.
I think honestly, I don't necessarily know if I want Farke sacked because I generally think that for
mutual consent.
For what our ambitions are as a club right now, I do think they match Farke's in terms of we just want to develop players. I just think more so we should change our ambition to want to be in the Premier League and want to be self-sustainable at that level. And we've failed at it so many times. But that's the thing. And that's the thing, I guess, as a fan. I don't want to, as much as I guess, we always have to kind of become accustomed to it. I think the tough thing is for me to take right now is more so that it feels like with Farke, you're accepting of the fact that he could take, like, you could literally be in League One, and if he's like giving good players to to sell on, that is a success. And that's my problem, is that, as much as I love to kind of have this model where we see young players come through, it is so frustrating to think of the talent or the positions we're wasting where we could be at that upper echelon, that upper level, and we're almost sacrificing that. And I don't know, it's an interesting one, but unless any of you guys have anything to add on that, it's probably best if we kind of move into the next couple of games ahead for Norwich. Now, I guess it's kind of like a wider point. Tactically, I guess we should probably go into, do you expect or do you want to see any kind of major changes, whether that be personnel or just the way we set up, whether that be formation wise? How do you think we're going to approach the 3 games after? Because it's fair to say, I think we play Wickham. Is Wickham our next game back?
Rotherham and Birmingham.
We've got 3 games, which
on
paper
we've got.
You're laughing, aren't you, on paper? But that's the problem.
Yeah. I don't usually say things like this, but I think anything less than sort of 9 points from these 3 games won't be good enough, considering the start Norwich had. We've got 2 weeks to prepare now. I know, okay, certain players aren't going to be here, but you got Wickham. What is it? Wickham, Rotherham, and Birmingham. Like, come on! Like, if you're not beating these sides, then you're not getting out of this league. And I think it's a big week for Farke, because we could be sat here at the end of it, at the end of that week, sort of like pushing on and everything will be positive. But if we see sort of similar results to what we've seen in the last few weeks, then there will be pressure. I mean, if we don't beat Wickham, then there's something is seriously wrong. Because I think, with all due respect to Wickham, they probably could get the lowest points tally in the history of the Championship, and Rotherham don't look too much better. So it'll be interesting, but I think it'll be a big week, and I think the transfer window would have closed by then. So you know the players you've got around, and it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
What about you, Ben?
So I'm scared of the fact that you said you want 9 points from these 3 games, because the Championship's the most unpredictable league in the world. I agree, we should be expecting them, but at the same time, I'm also not expecting them, because the Championship is just so stupidly unpredictable. It's a massive spell for Daniel Farke. These next 3 games are pivotal, because he's already on sort of the brink of, I don't know what to call it, sort of anti-Farke, the anti-Farke movement growing. That's what he's on the brink of. If we now go and lose 2 of the next 3, I do fear for him in terms of he will have just lost the fans completely, or the majority of the fans. I'm sure there will still be a few, probably myself included, trying to be more level-headed and understand the vision of the club. But yeah, the spell is huge. In terms of the actual way that we can approach the games, it'll be the same. It won't not be the same. I'd like to see Jordan Hugill if we're going to keep crossing the ball in. I'd like to see Timu Pukki if we're going to get Stiepermann and Buendia to cut inside and play those balls through the middle, like he did against Derby really well. But yeah, Daniel Farke needs to be more tactically adept. And I don't know if that can happen, because I've been saying this I've been thinking this for since he joined Norwich City, really, to be honest with you. But yeah, it is such a massive spell for Daniel Farke, and he'll be feeling the pressure. There was signs last season that he was going to crack. I'm not going to mention the Pinkin again, because that would be a record 5th time. And speaking of record 5th times, not many managers survive a record relegation from the Premier League. It's all very bizarre at the moment, isn't it? I just don't understand what's going on at Norwich. I do fear that we are at the end of the cycle. You guys have been Norwich City fans as long as me. Norwich City do this, don't they? They cycle. They go from mediocrity to playing really well, relegation, rebuild, and whatever sort of form that comes in. Norwich City tend to do that. I hope it's not that this time, but my main concern is that Norwich City are at the end of their cycle, and we're going to have to do it all over again, because I don't know who mentioned sacking Farke earlier, but if you were to do that, you would have to do the last 4 years all over again. But yeah, Daniel Farke is sort of, he's at his wit's end really, isn't he? In terms of mentally, he looks just sort of a bit confused. He looks quite angry, and I don't know if he's all still there, but I don't know.
He's lost his marbles.
I think he has lost his footballing marbles. I think he's on the brink of losing his footballing marbles. No doubt he'll bounce back if he was to leave Norwich, but there's so much uncertainty right now. But I say this at the same time. I remember thinking before this podcast, I do want to stress, there's no crisis at Norwich City right now. There's no like Norwich aren't going to fold, Norwich aren't going to liquidate, which has been the problem and was the problem before Stuart Webber. There's none of that. I'm very glad that it's all football, and will we be in the Premier League as opposed to will we be a football club? Are we suddenly going to go bust because we've spent £8 million on Stephen Naismith? Christ alive! But yeah, it's just oh god, guys, I'm going to break down in a minute.
So I guess it's probably a good point to end before you break, Ben. Thank you so much for coming on again, Ben.
Cheers.
In all honesty, we've covered so many topics. It almost does it justice in 4 separate parts or something like that. But in terms of where people can kind of find your content, Ben, where can they find you?
Just Norwich Talking, and click Norwich Talk, not the other one. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
You
might even City at the end.
You might even find us on there as well.
You'll see you a few times. Yeah. Alfie more than Billy. Remember that.
Yeah, when it actually gets uploaded.
Well, thank you for anyone who's made it to the end of this podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, would love it if you could download the podcast. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, would love it if you could rate it. However you feel like the podcast deserves to be rated. Preferably
probably about a 2-star by this.
And if you're watching on YouTube as well, obviously feel free to like and subscribe. We're a relatively new channel here as well, but be sure to check out our Norwich Talk as well. I'm rambling on, so I guess it's probably a good point to end it, and we'll see you guys later.